The courthouse breathed its usual morning rhythm. Heels clicking, papers whispering, murmurs bouncing off marble and glass. Every surface gleamed like truth polish for display. The brass seal of the state glowed in the sunlight pouring through tall windows, a monument to justice and to appearances. A black woman stepped through the metal detector, briefcase in hand, dressed in a navy suit so sharply tailored it seemed to cut the air. Her name was Kesha Daniels, though no one bothered to ask. Her badge lanyard was tucked discreetly inside her jacket. She preferred quiet entrances. Today she would have a private meeting in her own chambers before court convened, a conversation about reform she'd fought years to bring to life. The security scanner beeped once. Then again, louder. A white officer by the name of Martinez frowned. "Ma'am, I need you to step aside." Kesha's brow furrowed lightly. "Of course." She set her briefcase down and spread her arms. She'd done this countless times, patient and polite. Martinez moved with a stiffness that felt rehearsed. "You here for jury duty?" "No." He looked her up and down, gaze lingering not on her face but on her skin. Her natural hair pulled neatly back. "Then what are you doing in here this early?" "I work here." "Doing what exactly?" His tone carried that practiced suspicion, the kind that didn't need volume to humiliate. A few onlookers slowed their pace. The younger deputy behind the checkpoint smirked faintly, the sort of smirk that follows habit, not humor. "I have a meeting in Chamber 3B, she said evenly. "If you check the schedule, you'll see my name." But he didn't check. He leaned forward, lowering his voice like a man daring her to rise to the bait. "Look, I don't make the rules, all right? Some people just wander in claiming they're attorneys," or his lips twitched. "Important." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Kesha could hear the flutter of her own pulse, but her expression stayed serene. Behind her, someone muttered, "Another one trying to sneak upstairs." Kesha exhaled slowly. Patience is part of power. Her mentor had once told her. Never trade it for pride. Pride spends fast. She smiled faintly. "Officer, I respect your diligence. Please contact Bailiff Henderson. He can vouch for me." Martinez scoffed. "You know the bailiff's name? That's cute." He turned toward the metal detector again. "Bag check. Open it." She did. Inside lay legal pads, pens, and a thick folder embossed with the courthouse crest. He flipped through the pages carelessly, scanning legal terminology that meant nothing to him. Memos, draft rulings, appellate notes. His eyebrows lifted. "Where'd you get these?" "They're mine." "Uh-huh." He snapped the folder shut and handed it to the younger deputy. "Could be confidential documents. We'll hold on to these until your status is verified." The deputy's grin widened. "Yeah, chain of custody and all that." Kesha's voice remained calm, though the temperature behind her eyes was changing. "You're confiscating federal documents without cause." Martinez shrugged. "You can file a complaint, if you belong here." The words landed heavier than a shout. Across the hall, two court clerks had paused their conversation, watching through glass. The younger one whispered, "Why is security hassling her?" The older clerk answered without looking up, "Standard protocol." But both knew that Standard wore a familiar face. Kesha reached into her jacket pocket, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a thin wallet. "May I show you something?" Martinez stiffened. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Her hand froze midair. For the first time, the crowd went quiet. She lowered the wallet back into her jacket, her voice barely above a whisper. "Understood." The air thickened with the kind of silence that tastes like embarrassment you can't name. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered, "This is getting ridiculous." Then, from the far end of the hallway, a familiar baritone voice rang out. "Officer Martinez." Bailiff Henderson strode toward them, coat open, coffee forgotten in his hand. His face shifted from curiosity to horror in a heartbeat. "Good morning, Judge Daniels," he said, loud enough for the entire checkpoint to hear. Every sound in the hallway died. Martinez blinked. "Judge what?" Henderson stopped beside her. "Your Honor, I didn't expect you till 9. The titles crashed through the silence like a verdict. "Your Honor." Kesha inclined her head, the gesture regal, controlled. "Good morning, Henderson. There seems to have been a misunderstanding." Henderson's jaw tightened. "Yes, ma'am. A serious one." He turned to the officer, voice clipped. "Officer Martinez, this is the presiding judge of this courthouse." Color drained from Martinez's face. I was just following." "Protocol?" Henderson's tone cut like cold steel. "Protocol does include harassing our own judge." The younger deputy took a quiet step backward, his grin evaporating. Kesha lifted her briefcase calmly from the scanner table. "No harm done," she said softly, though the bruise of insult still burned invisible on her skin. "I'll take it from here." She walked past them, heels clicking with the rhythm of authority reclaimed. Each step echoed longer than the last, filling the corridor with a strange, reverent quiet. Behind her, whispers bloomed like aftershocks. "That's the judge. She's the one on the Williams versus State case. She's been here for 20 years. Martinez stood frozen, eyes wide, replaying every word he'd said. The look on his face wasn't just fear. It was a dawning comprehension that the hierarchy he thought unshakable had just inverted completely. Upstairs, sunlight pooled through the stained glass skylight of courtroom 3B, turning the mahogany bench into something almost holy. Kesha walked the center aisle slowly, letting the silence settle. Her fingertips brushed the worn rail, where defendants placed their hands to swear an oath. The courtroom smelled faintly of paper and varnish and history. She set her briefcase on the bench, exhaled, and allowed herself a single, private smile. Downstairs, she could still hear the murmur of voices, the sudden rush of explanations, the scramble to justify, the soft panic that comes when power realizes it's not absolute. But she didn't gloat. That wasn't her way. She touched the wooden edge of her chair, her real chair, and whispered to the empty room. They never learn until the tables turn. The clock above the bench ticked softly toward 9. In 30 minutes. She presided over a docket filled with ordinary cases, but the building itself had already rendered its first judgment of the day. Kesha straightened her files, her composure unbroken. She knew Henderson would file a report, that the chief judge would call before noon, that apologies would come laced with excuses. None of that mattered now. What mattered was the echo still lingering in the marble hallway below, the sound of assumption colliding with truth. And somewhere down there, Officer Martinez was still staring at the scanner table, realizing that for the first time in his career, he would be the one waiting to be called into court. If you are enjoying this story, please subscribe to support the channel. By mid-morning, the courthouse pulsed with rumor. Word had spread faster than filings could be stamped. The judge, had been detained at her own front door. The story morphed with every retelling. Some whispered she'd forgotten her badge. Others said she'd been caught in a restricted zone. No one mentioned the truth, how easily a black woman's authority could evaporate under fluorescent light. Down in the security office, Officer Martinez rehearsed his version like a man practicing an alibi. She refused to comply, he said for the 4th time. Raised her voice, wouldn't show ID. I followed procedure. The shift sergeant typed his report without meeting his eyes. You're saying she didn't identify herself? Martinez swallowed. Not clearly. She said she worked here. I get 20 people a week claiming that. The sergeant sighed through his nose. And you didn't recognize her? How could I? She wasn't in robes. A pause. Besides, you think judges walk around unescorted? He sounded convinced enough for paper, if not for truth. Upstairs, Judge Kesha Daniels sat in her chambers, the blinds half drawn, light slashing across the mahogany desk. She held a cold compress to her temple where tension, not injury, throbbed. On the table lay 2 objects, her judicial ID badge and the confiscation receipt for the documents Martinez had seized. The contrast between them felt obscene. Her clerk, Janet, hovered in the doorway, twisting a pen. Your Honor, the chief judge wants to schedule a meeting about this morning. Kesha set down the compress. Of course he does. They're already drafting a statement. Something about a misunderstanding at the security checkpoint. Of course they are. She smiled without humor. The system hates embarrassment almost as much as it hates accountability. Janet hesitated. Do you want me to clear your docket? No, Kesha said. We proceed as planned. She looked at the reflection of herself in the dark window. For 23 years she had worn these robes, rendered verdicts, carried the weight of fairness like a second spine. Yet this morning one man's assumption had stripped that from her in seconds. She'd felt it, not just the disrespect, but the reminder of how fragile perception could be. The robe granted power only until someone refused to see it. At 11 sharp, she walked into courtroom 3B. The hum of conversation died instantly. Word had spread that she was back, but no one knew what she would do. The defendant, a nervous young man in a cheap suit, stared as if watching history. The attorneys whispered like conspirators. Even the bailiff stood unusually stiff, eyes darting to Martinez, seated at the rear wall, summoned for testimony in an unrelated hearing. He hadn't expected to see her again so soon. Kesha adjusted her glasses and spoke in the same calm tone she used for every session. This court is now in session. Let's proceed. But the room vibrated with a different kind of electricity. Every sentence she spoke felt weighted with unspoken context. Proof that dignity, once threatened, could return sharper than before. After the morning docket, the administrative hearing began. Ironically, a review of courthouse security procedures. Kesha had requested to preside. Officially, it was routine oversight. Unofficially, it was a mirror turned toward the entire building. She opened the folder Henderson had handed her earlier. Officer Martinez, please step forward. The scrape of his chair against the floor echoed like penance. He adjusted his collar, cleared his throat. Yes, Your Honor. You were on duty at the main checkpoint this morning? Yes, ma'am. Explain to the court how identification protocols are applied to courthouse personnel. He relaxed slightly, reciting from memory. All entrants must display a visible ID badge or be verified through digital registry. If credentials are missing, we ask for name and department and confirm through central logs. Good. And if the individual identifies herself as a judge? He hesitated. We, verify through the clerk's office. Did you do that this morning? The silence stretched. Henderson shifted behind her. A dozen spectators held their breath. No, ma'am, Martinez admitted. Why not? I didn't believe she was. He stopped himself, realizing too late what he'd almost said. Didn't believe she was what? He swallowed. A judge. Kesha leaned forward slightly. Why? He stared at the floor. Because she wasn't dressed like one. She let the moment hang until it ached. So attire determines authority? Martinez's throat clicked. No, Your Honor. Then what does? He said nothing. Because if it's not clothing, Officer Martinez, she continued, one must ask what, precisely, you saw that made you doubt my role here. A murmur rippled through the benches. He flushed a dangerous red. With respect, Your Honor, he stammered, I made an error in judgment. Yes, she said softly. You did. The record of the hearing would show only procedural notes. Questions, answers, acknowledgments. But those present knew they were witnessing something rarer. Accountability in real time. After dismissing him, Kesha turned to address the room. This courthouse represents the promise that every citizen will be treated with equal dignity at its doors. When that promise falters, even for a moment, it isn't a minor incident. It's a breach of trust. Her words floated through the hush like verdicts themselves. We cannot undo perception, she went on, but we can confront it. And we will. The young stenographer's fingers trembled on her keys. Henderson's chin lifted, pride flickering behind his solemn eyes. Later that afternoon, in the staff lounge, voices buzzed again, but with new inflection. I can't believe she held the hearing herself. She didn't yell, didn't even raise her voice. She didn't need to. Martinez sat alone at a corner table, untouched coffee cooling beside him. Every sound felt magnified. The hiss of the vending machine, the distant slam of a door. On his phone, the internal memo had already arrived. Formal review of incident pending. He replayed the morning over and over, realizing how each small assumption had stacked like dominoes until final one toppled. A lifetime of habits distilled into one humiliating moment. That evening, Judge Daniel stayed late, long after the courthouse emptied. Outside, the city throbbed with traffic, horns bleeding into the night air. Inside, only the hum of fluorescent lights and the rhythmic tick of a wall clock kept her company. She opened her journal, a simple leather notebook she kept for reflections, not rulings, and wrote, "Today I saw my own institution through another's eyes. I was not a judge in that hallway. I was a suspect of perception. The uniform did not protect me. The title did not follow me. The robe is an illusion until you remind them who wears it." She paused, tapping the pen, then added, "Tomorrow I will remind them, not with anger, but with evidence." She closed the journal, slid it into her briefcase, and glanced once more toward the bench. In its shadow, she felt both the weight and privilege of her role. Somewhere, Officer Martinez would spend a sleepless night composing apologies that couldn't quite reach the wound he'd opened. Kesha turned off the lamp. The courtroom fell into darkness, save for a single ray of streetlight slicing through the blinds and striking the judge's chair. Dust motes shimmered in its path, like tiny verdicts suspended in air. She smiled faintly, whispering to herself, "Tomorrow the record will speak." And she stepped out into the corridor, steady, composed, carrying silence the way other people carried armor. The next morning, the courthouse buzzed like a hive disturbed. No one said her name aloud, yet everyone spoke it. Judge Daniels. The story had spread beyond the building now. A quiet scandal whispered in hallways, shared between clerks, repeated in staff elevators. A federal judge mistaken for an intruder. Some said she demanded an internal review. Others claimed she filed a civil rights complaint. No one knew what she would do next. The air carried a charge: anticipation, fear, fascination. Because no one ever saw power fall silent and then speak again. Inside courtroom 3B, the morning light slanted through tall, arched windows, turning dust into gold. Kesha sat behind her bench, posture straight, expression unreadable. Her robe, pressed to perfection, draped over her shoulders like armor. Before her, a stack of files rested neatly in two piles. One marked routine docket, the other security review hearing. It was the latter that had drawn a standing room-only crowd. Law clerks, junior attorneys, and officers had all found excuses to be present. A local journalist sat in the back row, pretending to check her phone. At precisely 9 o'clock, the bailiff's voice rang out, deep and deliberate. "All rise. Court is now in session." The Honorable Judge Kesha Daniels presiding. The room obeyed instantly. Hundreds of bodies standing as one. A collective exhale of reverence and curiosity. Kesha nodded once. "Be seated." She let the hush settle, measured the weight of the silence, then spoke. "Before we begin today's proceedings, this court must address a matter of internal concern that touches not only this courthouse but the principle of justice itself." Pens froze mid-scribble. The clerk's hands trembled slightly on the keys. "Yesterday morning," she continued, "an incident occurred at the courthouse security checkpoint. An officer detained a member of this court staff, questioned her legitimacy, and confiscated official documents without probable cause or verification. The individual in question was myself." A ripple spread across the gallery, a physical sound, like wind moving through grass. Someone muttered, "Oh my God!" Another gasped. Kesha's voice stayed calm, anchored. "I did not bring this to the public docket to embarrass anyone. I brought it here to teach this institution a truth it continues to resist, that justice cannot afford the luxury of assumptions." Her gaze moved across the room, meeting eyes that quickly dropped. "We tell juries that evidence matters more than appearances. We tell defendants they will be seen for their actions, not their image. And yet," she gestured subtly toward the security desk visible through the glass doors, "we allow perception to govern who we treat with dignity. No anger, no trembling, just truth." Each syllable carried the clean edge of law sharpened by lived experience. "Officer Martinez," she said, turning toward the row where he sat, pale and rigid, uniform freshly pressed. "Would you please approach the stand?" He hesitated, then rose. His boots clicked against a marble, echoing like small admissions. He faced her, swallowed, and nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." "Yesterday, You filed a report describing your encounter with me. Have you reviewed that statement? Yes, ma'am. Does it reflect the truth? He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. It reflects what I perceived at the time. Perception, Kesha repeated, as though tasting the word. Let's examine that. She pressed a button on the bench microphone. Clerk, please display Exhibit A. On the screen behind her, the security camera footage appeared. Time-stamped, clear, color-accurate. The video showed the checkpoint lobby. Kesha entering. Martinez stopping her. The gestures, the posture, the unspoken power imbalance. All of it captured in the cold objectivity of surveillance. A murmur spread through the audience. Even those who hadn't believed the rumors now saw the truth unfiltered. For the record, Kesha said, this footage was retrieved from the courthouse security archive less than 1 hour after the incident. It confirms the absence of aggression, profanity, or noncompliance on my part. She turned back to Martinez. Officer, do you contest this evidence? His Adam's apple bobbed. No, Your Honor. Then let the record show, she said softly, that what was described as suspicion was, in fact, assumption, and what was recorded as noncompliance was, in fact, composure. The court reporter's keys clattered furiously, the sound like applause restrained by professionalism. You see, Kesha continued, this is how bias sustains itself, not through laws, but through habits. It hides in the everyday moments, who we stop, who we question, who we believe, and who we doubt. She looked around the courtroom, her eyes calm but piercing. And when those habits go unchecked inside a courthouse, they become something far more dangerous. They become culture. A pause, the kind that demanded reflection. Officer Martinez, this court will not issue disciplinary measures today. That is for the Oversight Board. But I will ask you one question, not as your judge, but as a fellow public servant. He looked up, surprised by the softness in her tone. When you saw me yesterday morning, who did you think I was? He hesitated. His voice cracked. I thought you were someone trying to sneak in. Why? He shook his head, shame spreading across his face. You look out of place. Out of place, she repeated, the phrase rolling slowly off her tongue. In a courthouse where I have served for 23 years, where my portrait hangs in the main hall, where my rulings are studied in the appellate courts. She leaned forward slightly. Tell me, officer, when will the law stop deciding who belongs? He had no answer. None of them did. When the hearing adjourned, the courtroom didn't empty right away. People lingered in silence, as if leaving too soon would betray the moment. Some avoided her eyes. Others nodded respectfully. Outside, the corridor was lined with reporters. Flashbulbs popped like gunfire of light. Questions flew. Judge Daniels, are you pressing charges? Is the department investigating? Do you plan to make a statement to the press? She paused on the courthouse steps, the same marble where the misunderstanding had begun. I already made my statement, she said. Inside, under oath, where it belongs. The microphones caught every word. By evening, clips would circle online, headlines flashing across feeds. Judge teaches lesson on bias, without raising her voice. Dignity in action, the day justice spoke for herself. Later, back in her chambers, Kesha stood by the window overlooking the city. The courthouse glowed beneath her, white columns bathed in sunset, traffic crawling below like veins carrying the lifeblood of order and chaos. Her clerk knocked gently. Your Honor, the chief judge wants you to know the Oversight Board has opened a formal inquiry into security procedures. Kesha smiled faintly. Good. Let's hope it's the start of something larger. Janet lingered, then added, everyone's been talking about how calm you were, how you never raised your voice once. Kesha looked out the window, her reflection shimmering against the skyline. When you've lived your whole life proving you belong, she said quietly, you learn that silence can be louder than shouting. She turned away from the glass and reached for the robe hanging behind the door. The fabric brushed her fingers like a promise renewed. Tomorrow, she said, we go back to work, but not the same. Outside, down in the marble hallway, a janitor polished the floor where the confrontation had happened. He hummed softly as he worked, glancing up at the nameplate mounted above the main courtroom doors. Han, Kesha Daniels, presiding judge. He smiled to himself, whispering under his breath, "That's what justice looks like." 3 days later, the courthouse smelled different. Gone was the faint comfort of coffee and copier ink, replaced by something metallic, sterile, anxious. The Judicial Oversight Board had taken over the top floor, sealing it behind glass walls and uniformed guards. Inside, the most powerful judges and administrators in the state sat in semicircular formation, their expressions carefully neutral, their microphones blinking red like a constellation of silent judgment. And in the center sat Judge Kesha Daniels, calm, upright, unflinching. Her presence shifted the air. Everyone knew this wasn't just about a single incident at a checkpoint. It was about the system that made that incident possible. The hearing began at precisely 10 a.m. The chair, an older man named Justice Lowell, adjusted his glasses. "Judge Daniels, thank you for appearing voluntarily. You understand this proceeding is administrative, not disciplinary." "I do," she said evenly. He nodded. "There's been a considerable reaction to your courtroom statement. The footage has been circulated beyond this building. The public is engaged. Some believe you acted courageously. Others believe you compromised judicial decorum by making the matter public." Kesha's expression didn't change. "Truth and decorum rarely coexist comfortably, Mr. Chairman." A few pens hesitated mid-note. Justice Lowell cleared his throat. "Our purpose today is to determine whether your actions, broadcasting internal security footage and addressing bias allegations during open court, violated judicial protocol." Kesha leaned forward slightly, voice low but resonant. "With respect, our purpose should be to determine why a sitting judge was mistaken for an intruder in her own courthouse." The words landed like glass breaking quietly. On one end of the panel, a woman in a gray suit, Justice Miranda Clark, spoke up. "Judge Daniels, no one questions the incident was regrettable, but many of us feel this should have been handled privately, not turned into a spectacle." Kesha's gaze flickered to her, composed yet cutting. "Do you believe privacy would have produced accountability, Justice Clark? Because the record of this institution suggests otherwise." She opened the folder in front of her and slid several pages forward. "In the past 5 years, this board has reviewed 17 bias-related complaints from staff and attorneys. Not one resulted in public acknowledgement, let alone reform. Silence may protect reputations, but it rarely protects justice." The silence that followed was almost reverent. Across the room, the courthouse's chief security director, a nervous man named Colonel Avery, fidgeted with his tie. He'd been subpoenaed to testify about departmental training protocols. Kesha turned to him. "Colonel, how many judges currently serve in this building?" 23, Your Honor. "And how many of them are women of color?" He shifted in his seat. "Just one." Kesha arched an eyebrow. "So statistically, the likelihood of mistaking a judge for an intruder would be, shall we say, low?" He swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor." "Then what does that tell you?" That our identification procedures may need review." "Not just review," Kesha corrected softly. "Reconstruction." Every camera in the room turned toward her. Outside, the hearing streamed live to millions. On courthouse steps, protesters held signs that read, "Assumptions are not protocol. Equal justice starts at the door." Inside, Lowell shifted again, his tone more measured now. "Judge Daniels, the footage you presented has sparked intense national debate. Some claim you politicize the judiciary. Others see you as a symbol of integrity. What would you say to those who believe your actions erode public trust?" Kesha clasped her hands. "I would remind them that public trust doesn't erode because we expose injustice. It erodes because we hide it." She stood, not out of defiance, but precision, every movement deliberate, judicial. "Let me be clear. I did not embarrass this court. The truth did that. All I did was hold up a mirror." The stenographer's fingers trembled as they tried to keep up. "If a courthouse is not safe for one of its own judges to enter without suspicion," she continued, "then how can a single mother trust that same building protect her rights? How can a young public defender believe his arguments will be heard without bias? How can any citizen believe justice here is blind?" Her voice rose only slightly, just enough to fill the chamber with conviction. I am not asking for sympathy. I am demanding consistency. The last word rang like a gavel strike. Justice Clark exhaled slowly. Judge Daniels, what are you asking this board to do? Kesha turned toward the audience, reporters, officers, and citizens watching behind glass. Not punish one officer. Not write another memo about sensitivity training. I want policy, structure, safeguards that ensure the next person who walks through those doors is seen as a human being before they are seen as a threat. She picked up her folder again and slid a document across to the chair. This is a proposal for the Equal Access and Dignity Protocol, a set of reforms requiring implicit bias education for all courthouse staff, independent review of security footage in any complaint, and inclusion of community advocates on oversight boards. It has been sitting in committee for 18 months without a vote. Lowell scanned the document, blinking. You wrote this? I drafted it, she said, but I'm done waiting for permission to defend fairness. For the first time, applause broke protocol. It began with one spectator, then two, then spread through the room like thunder muffled by reverence. The chair tried to restore order, but the emotion was uncontrollable, restrained only by respect for the woman standing before them. When the sound finally died down, Lowell leaned toward his microphone. Judge Daniels, your points are well taken. The board will reconvene for deliberation. She gave a small nod. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But as she gathered her papers, she added, remember, this isn't about me. It's about the thousands of people who pass through these halls every day and hope the scales of justice don't tip before they open their mouths. That evening, her testimony aired on every major network. Commentators called it the calmest revolution in legal history. Clips flooded social media. Her poised delivery, her quiet authority, her single devastating line. I did not embarrass this court. The truth did that. By midnight, her speech had reached nearly 8 million views. Law students quoted her words in lectures. Security departments across the country requested transcripts. And somewhere in a small precinct office, Officer Martinez watched the replay alone, realizing he'd become a footnote in a story far larger than his mistake. At dawn, as the city stirred, Kesha arrived early at the courthouse. The guard at the checkpoint, a young black woman this time, straightened instantly. Good morning, Your Honor, she said, smiling. Welcome back. Kesha smiled in return. Thank you. As she walked through the metal detector, the machine beeped softly. The guard waved her through anyway. I think we both know you belong here. Kesha's laughter was quiet, genuine, cleansing. For the first time in days, the courthouse felt whole again. That morning, the Oversight Board voted unanimously to adopt her reforms. The resolution's preamble read, in recognition of an incident that revealed not only human error but institutional blind spots, the board hereby enacts the Equal Access and Dignity Protocol, ensuring that every individual entering this courthouse shall be treated with respect consistent with the ideals of justice itself. The order was signed by every member, with one addition written in pen at the bottom, suggested by the chair himself, proposed and inspired by the Honorable Judge Kesha Daniels. The vote made headlines before the ink even dried. By noon, every major outlet had the same banner stretched across their screens. Equal Access Protocol unanimously approved. Judge Daniels sparks historic reform. Commentators called it a new chapter in American justice. Clips from the oversight hearing flooded timelines. Her calm voice, that one devastating line replayed endlessly. I did not embarrass this court. The truth did that. It became a refrain. Students quoted it in classrooms. Protesters painted it on cardboard signs. Law professors used it as shorthand for the moment dignity became activism. Even in cafes around the courthouse, people repeated her words like prayer, softly, respectfully, as if they belonged to everyone now. Within weeks, her reform spread beyond state lines. Baltimore adopted it first, then Chicago, then Atlanta. County supervisors in California passed a similar measure after her testimony went viral on TikTok. Millions had watched that clip of her sitting still beneath the courtroom lights, the world tilting toward her composure. One senator drafted a bill nicknamed the Daniels Standard, a national requirement that every courthouse implement independent oversight for bias-related incidents. The bill passed its first committee hearing in record time. Universities flooded her inbox with invitations. She declined most of them. "Let the law speak louder than applause," she told her clerk, though once in a while she accepted a small event at a law school or an HBCU. She never brought a speech. She just walked to the podium and spoke from her lived experience. "Justice doesn't always roar," she told one audience in Atlanta. "Sometimes it whispers until the world has no choice but to listen." The students didn't clap right away. They just stood quietly for a few seconds, letting the words land before the ovation began. At the courthouse, small revolutions began quietly. The new guards greeted everyone with warmth, not suspicion. The morning atmosphere felt lighter. Even the walls seemed to hum differently. Officer Martinez had been reassigned to administrative duty, pending further review. His official apology came not through the press, but as a handwritten letter left with the clerk's office. "Your Honor," it began, "I've spent 15 years enforcing rules without ever asking where they came from. For the first time, I understand what they cost. I'm sorry, not because I was caught, but because I finally saw the person I refused to see." Kesha read it once, folded it carefully, and slipped it into a drawer marked lessons, not evidence. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about moving forward without dragging the past like an anchor. 6 months later, she received an email from the United Nations Office on Human Rights. They wanted her to deliver the keynote at World Justice Day in Geneva. The final line of the invitation read, "Your courtroom became a classroom for the planet." When she stood at the podium beneath the soft blue UN emblem, cameras flashing like distant stars, she spoke without notes. "The law is a promise written in ink," she said, "but its credibility is written in conduct. If we want citizens to trust the scales, they must first trust the hand to hold them." When she finished, the entire chamber rose in a standing ovation that sounded like a tide rolling through marble. She bowed her head slightly. She hadn't wanted fame, just accountability that didn't vanish when the cameras did. Months later, she returned home. The courthouse was quieter now, steadier. She entered courtroom 3B late on a Friday afternoon. Sunlight poured through the windows, catching dust motes that glowed like confetti frozen midair. Her clerk, Janet, was boxing old files. "They're naming the new annex after you," Janet said. Kesha smiled faintly. "I told them not to. They voted already. The Daniels Hall of Justice has a nice sound to it. Justice doesn't need my name," she said softly. "It just needs memory." Janet smiled. "Then that's what the plaque will say." When Janet left, Kesha sat at the bench alone, pulling her worn leather journal from her briefcase, the same one she'd opened on the night of the incident. She turned to a blank page and began to write. It began with humiliation and ended with policy. It began with silence and ended with conversation large enough for a nation. She paused, then added one last line. "Dignity is the loudest sound in a quiet room." She closed the book gently, ran her hand across the desk, and let the silence settle. Monday came with a new kind of morning. The courthouse lobby gleamed like a promise renewed. Fresh signage hung over the entrance. "Equal access zone. Respect is our first rule." Kesha arrived early. The new guard, a young black woman still learning the ropes, straightened as she approached. "Good morning, Your Honor." "Good morning," Kesha replied, setting her bag on the scanner. The young woman smiled nervously. "First day on the job. They told us about you in training." "Oh." "They said you changed how we treat people. They told us to see everyone as if they might be the judge." Kesha smiled, stepping to the detector. "That's a very good rule." The scanner beeped softly, and the guard laughed. "Guess it likes you." Kesha laughed too, the sound echoing to the high ceiling. Soft, unguarded, human. By year's end, the Equal Access Protocol had been adopted in courthouses across all 50 states. A Justice Department report noted a measurable decline in bias complaints and a marked improvement in public trust. Training footage of Kesha's testimony became mandatory in new officer orientation. One evening, she opened her email and found a message from a young law student. "Because of you, I applied to be a public defender. She read it twice, smiled, and closed her laptop. It wasn't the applause or the headlines that mattered. It was the ripple, the quiet reach of one moment of courage touching someone she'd never meet. Later that night, she walked out of the courthouse alone. The city glowed violet under the fading light. She paused on the same marble steps where it had all begun, the place where an assumption had tried to erase her identity. Now, a small bronze plaque was mounted beside the railing. She hadn't approved it, but she didn't mind. It read, on this spot, justice spoke for herself. Kesha traced the letters gently, then looked up at the courthouse glowing against the night sky. Justice doesn't wear a blindfold, she whispered. She wears memory. A breeze brushed against her robe, lifting it slightly as if the building itself exhaled in relief. She descended the steps slowly, the kind of stride that belonged to someone who no longer had anything to prove. Only more work left to do. Behind her, the courthouse clock struck 6 times, each chime echoing like a heartbeat, not an ending, a pulse. Because justice, once awakened, does not sleep again. If you like this story, please subscribe to support this channel.